John's last slide was referencing Max Tegmark's quote again, and it's, what do we want the future to be like? And hilariously, that was my first question. So I think John's told us what he wants the future to be like. But I'd love to hear from the rest of the panel. So starting with Adebisi, what do you want the future to be like?
Right. So I want the future to be one where AI is used for good, not one where AI is a tool to solve every problem, because not every problem is an AI problem. Most of them are social problems. So a future where AI is used for good to solve things like the grand challenges like climate change and in health. So that's what I want to see.
Can you hear me? I would say I would like the future to be fully automated luxury communism. Fully automated luxury communism. Well, potentially gay.
You're going to have to explain that a bit more.
So I think this is going to open up to a broader question, but I think AI currently is intertwined with capitalism enormously. As John alluded to, corporations are making AI. Corporations to do the right thing, because there's no interest under capitalism to do the right thing. There's only an interest to make more money. So I think the fully automated luxury, potentially gay communism is going to way forward, right? I think the benevolent AI with a sensible redistribution of wealth is probably the only sensible way forward. I won't say any more about that. I'll pass it on.
How do I follow that? Yeah, I guess on the same theme, I want to see the future where the benefits and all the different forms are more equally distributed. And I think there are a lot of benefits to come from AI that you can already see and we can't even imagine yet. So that's the positive bit. I'm now going to turn into the doom monger. What do I want to see? I want to be, I guess, I would like to see my thank you. My grandchildren to have a planet to live on, a planet which is biologically alive, and the robots don't wipe us out. We'll talk about that later.
I think for me, there's sort of like minor things and major things. So I spoke about health and that idea, and it does feel like, it's closer to a no-brainer that AI could be used to enhance healthcare. Like, there are lots of problems that are health related in the world. Could it actually be used to do that? Could some form of central regulation or, some sort of global committee to be formed to sort of pull in that kind of research and to centralize that research and to then use, there's a huge amount of compute power or whatever going on in the world that probably does things that aren't great for humanity, works out the next TikTok video you're going to watch or something. Could we re-channel some of that into, actually working out how to solve complex, let's say, health problems or other things. So, that kind of centralized sort of regulation, I think, for something that most people would agree. And yeah, I get the kind of unintended consequences. It might, I haven't thought it all the way through. But there are some kind of, low-hanging fruit, some hopefully things that are positive to most people that, we can start with. We can do stuff. And then I kind of think the other side, and it's sort of why I went down that sort of Mount Everest kind of rabbit hole, is that, sort of as a person living in the world, and you mentioned your grandchildren, I don't think we kind of, okay, another film spoiler for you. If anyone's seen Wall-E, I don't think we kind of want the world to look like Wall-E. I'd recommend watching it if you haven't, because by the end of it, it's a bit shit, really. We all kind of sit around in sort of, tracksuits, getting fat, not being able to do anything. And, the sort of, I don't think anyone sits there going, I really want that in my life. I'd like to be served and to sort of not really have to do anything kind of thing. No one's really looking forward to that. So all of that kind of, sort of, I need a robot in my house or I'm going to doing lots of things to make life easy that doesn't really need to be made easy. You know, it's just convenience. I think there's a bit of a danger with humans that we're really lazy. And so we do take advantage of those things when they come up, and it's a bit like, oh, that's a good idea. There's a robot washing my car or doing whatever. And then, you know, those things slowly get whistled away. And I think, you know, we do need to keep doing stuff and not go down the sort of lazy route of having stuff done for us in a way.
Well, certainly no doom and gloom in those answers then, thank goodness for that. It's prompted so many questions, but I'm gonna tell myself to stick to the script. But I do want to ask one question of the audience. Quick show of hands, who here is scared of AI taking over the world? There you go, and the panel as well. Who here is more scared of AI taking over the world after what they've heard tonight? Doing a good job. Anyone that's not scared of AI taking over the world, would you be happy to share with us why you're not scared? Anybody with their hand up?
More intrigued than anything. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm more intrigued than anything. Maybe naive, and then founded in kind of being intrigued in the wrong thing. But I think it would be quite interesting to just experience that.
And possibly the intrigue also to kind of, it's one of those things in life, is let's just see what happens with this. Let's just ride it out and see what happens. Is there one other?
Yeah, quite scared, but it's not so much that the AI is going to take over the world, although yeah, maybe, but it's more the because there's something above AI, which is like the owners of the AI, and I guess it's fear about what's going to happen at that level, like what they want to happen to the world, and do they have enough wisdom to make that choice for everyone?
I think we'll take one more and then we'll respond on that. Was there one more?
I think it's a bit like being worried about. Sorry, could you wait for the mic?
I think it's like being worried about news agencies being bad. I mean, they're only bad when the people who own them make them do bad things, right? So news agencies are good when they're good, and then when they're owned by people who are bad, they're bad. So if AI is owned by people who wish to do bad, then they will do bad. So then you can point your finger at AI, or point your finger at the people who are utilizing the AI, weaponizing the AI.
What do you mean by owned? Fox News.
I think it's definitely great to hear some different views from the audience. Adebisi, you had your hand up as well and said you're not worried. So do you want to explain to everybody why you're not worried?
Right. In my opinion, I think artificial general intelligence is a long way off, even if we're going to achieve that. I think it's hard to give consciousness to AI, and a decent amount of the news or information about AI is largely drawn from fiction and science fiction, the way we look at technologies. Sometimes I forgot what I wanted to say, but Hollywood and fiction has a good influence on how we look at technologies and technology taking over the world. I don't think we're quite there yet, or if we're going to get there in our lifetime, definitely not. So no. And it is important to note that some of what we ascribe to AI isn't AI. There's a human somewhere pulling some strings. There was a report in Times magazine that showed that one of these AI tools was actually being had input from humans in Kenya who were like filtering out the outputs. So, you know, we've got that. So a lot of hype in AI, and I think the hype is related to marketing and people wanting more money for these tools. That's my opinion.
It's good to get kind of a varied opinion level on this as well. And I think perhaps now, given that we're talking about uncertainty and different opinions, it's probably a good time to talk about the open letter that was, you know, almost, I mean, obviously the open letter was written with this event in mind, right? For those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, there was a letter to pause the giant AI experiments signed, I think, by over 2,500 people now, or roughly, yeah, tens of thousands. But I think with that in mind, where do we think we need to be before we can continue to evolve these tools? So perhaps, Colin, you could start us off on that one.
Yeah, just on the letter, I think it came out at 2 o'clock this morning. I woke up early, unusually for me, and at 6 o'clock and saw it and read it and thought, that's not that well written, but I've got to sign this because I think people need to stand up. I've been involved in AI for a number of years, so I do know a bit about it from both the commercial and technical side. So I think the point is that basically the letter was saying, I thought you haven't seen it, saying we need to pause AI for 6 months, and it's signed by a lot of very prominent people. I'm sure, well, I signed it, and I'm sure people who signed it realise that it's not going to happen. We're not going to have the pause, but I think it's time for people to actually consider it. I think the timing, saying to some of the people earlier when we were chatting, the timing is good because of recent events, but also Geoffrey Hinton, who's the godfather of AI, came out and did a TV interview. I think it was on Monday or the weekend with Canadian TV. He's kind of he's actually the guy who actually worked on neural networks back in I think it was the 70s or the 80s when everybody thought he was crazy, and he's kind of the godfather of it. And for instance, one of his students is actually one of the co-founders of OpenAI. So he said something at the weekend, which is a great video. I suggest you watch it. And he said he's seriously worried, and he's been very surprised how things are rapidly developing. So that was that's the letter. I can't remember what the question was.
Do you want me to remind you of the question for everybody else?
Sure.
So in relation to the letter, because we're talking about pausing these giant AI experiments, so where do we think we need to be before we can continue to evolve these tools?
Well, I think there's a couple of parts to this that need to be teased out. I think Adebisi's point about the fact that there's a lot of humans involved is very true. I think that the AI is currently a lot of cherry picking. People are showing you the best looking pictures and the best looking responses. Why, on the other hand, why I think this is an inflection point is because the large scale adoption of language models shifts the relationship with AI very dramatically. Because up until now, the only things that use language are other embodied humans. And suddenly we're living in a culture that has these things that is able to produce and converse language like humans. And we've been evolved for 300,000 years to accept that things that speak language to us are like us, and we will empathize with them and trust them. So there's a whole bunch of low-level psychology that comes into play when a thing starts talking to you that wasn't around before. So part of the danger right now is it's not that these things are brilliant and they're super intelligent, it's the fact that we're going to get used to talking to them. And we are going to imbue them with a whole bunch of perceived intelligence and agency that they don't actually have. But the game that they're playing, this language game they're playing with us, they're doing it in a very sophisticated manner. They can produce language, and they can also draw from a huge range of sources that no one person can keep in their head. So the kind of entity is different. I would caution using it any terms like AGI yet, but there's a qualitative difference with things that you can talk to. And I think that's why it's an inflection point. So I think the danger is actually going to be more cultural. Our culture will have to adapt to things that we chat to in a human-like way. And I think that will happen very quickly. And it won't be because they're super, super clever in the background. It's because they're just much easier to talk to. And I think that's part of the danger, is going to be the cultural shift there that's going to come before the general intelligence occurs.
I think from my point of view, again, it a little bit comes back to sort of governance and regulatory. There are obviously, if you look at, I suppose, how the world works, and there are potential sort of bad outcomes that can come from things like, sort of people misusing chat on the internet, then I think there needs to be some kind of regulation or control around that. There's very extreme cases of how it could be misused against sort of minors and various things. you know, it just feels like open season at the moment, that this technology has come out. And I think that's what I meant a little bit by the kind of, you know, it's just being tested on the population. And it feels like assuming by stopping all sort of AI experiments, they mean the sort of large generative, you know, sort of open AI, Bing, Bard, or all of the kind of, you know, large tech companies search things. So yeah, it just feels like that's just been thrown at the population, and there's probably not the sort of legal or regulatory, or from what you said, even the sort of human capacity to deal with that. And so getting those in place and getting the idea of, you know, sort of even the idea of responsibility. So if ChatGPT or something comes up and, you know, there's a teenager online and, you know, somehow it gets into a conversation that they should go and kill themselves or something, yes, there's guardrails on this and all these things. You know, where's even the legal responsibility? I don't think anything is understood at the moment. You know, it just really is the Wild West. So I think there needs to be some kind of understanding of where the legal responsibilities are with this. And, you know, that and other things like that will start to force responsibility and sort of ownership and taking accountability for what people are developing.
I would like to add that the call for AI regulation is not new. It is something that the AI community, the ethics community has been advocating for. People like Sophia Noble, Ruha Benjamin have been saying that these tools need to be regulated. The question of if it can be paused for 6 months, no, but I don't think anybody's going to do that. And we must keep in mind when talking about regulations that these technology companies have been dissolving their ethic groups. And I wonder what that signals for the future from AI as a whole.
Brilliant. Well, it seems like it's open mic night as well tonight. I'm loving this. I'm loving the queue for, it's really British as well, this queue forming here. Lincoln has a question for our panel.
So maybe I'm a bit of a doom but a lot of the talk about the potential harms of AI have been talking about the potential future harms of AI. And so I just wanted to, I'm so glad you brought up the workers in Kenya, because that's what I came to talk about. That's why I stood up. And I was wondering if you guys, if I could get your thoughts a little bit on the current harms that that AI is causing. So one, I guess, like exploitation of workers in the global south. The example of OpenAI using workers in Kenya isn't the only example. There's other examples. I think in Berkeley, they have little robots that can deliver you pizza, and they figured out that it was like cheaper to hire people in Southeast Asia to do the navigation than it was to actually build the navigation system. But they market this as like these, you know, AI little robots that are delivering you pizza. So there's that. There's that potential harm, or that current harm that is currently happening. Then there's also the other issue is, you know, our planet has a limited carbon budget, which we are rapidly burning through. The amount of compute power that is going into these things, particularly like, you know, GPU compute, is astronomical. And that is all using up our limited carbon budget. So maybe we don't have to worry about the future harms, because we're not going to be around to experience them, because we're going to burn through our carbon budget and we're all going to be dead by, you know, by the time that AGI arrives. So I was just wondering if I could get the panel's thoughts on not the potential future harms, but the actual current harms that are occurring in the world.
Yeah, I think Adebisi is the best person to start on that one.
Yeah. And thank you for the questions. Right, starting with the current harms of AI. I'll start with AI in predictive policing. AI tools are increasingly used by police departments across the world to identify criminals and places where criminal activities can occur. The issue with this is that the data that powers these AI technologies are often biased, in the sense that these data are collected based on sometimes historically corrupt policing data. So that means that these technologies misidentify people a lot. They're not quite good at capturing people of color. They kind of like, their cameras, and if you know how cameras work, they tend to like, I think, overexpose people of color. So that means that you're not seeing us correctly. And when you deploy these tools to society, that means that you're identifying people as criminals who are not criminals. And it's been documented that in the US, this has been done, and people have suffered great injustice by being identified as criminals when they are not criminals in the first place. Also, we have the issue of the deployment of AI in recruitment. It's a nice one, not a nice one. Yeah, so companies have used AI in recruitment, and one tech company did this, and the result was that women were not being selected as the right candidate for jobs. So imagine a world where every recruitment company uses an AI tool to pick who the best candidate is. Women will not be getting certain jobs because we are just deemed as not fit. And why is that? Because the data that feeds these technologies are actually biased in some form. So those are two problems that are happening. Another potential problem is the use of AI, deepfakes. Yeah, deepfakes are going to be a problem, especially in the global south where misinformation is quite high, and people sometimes do not have the capacity to verify this information. And what does that mean for democracy? That means our democratic institutions will be questioned. If somebody can go create a deepfake video of a president saying XYZ thing that he did not say or she did not say, that is a problem for those countries. Yeah.
Wow, that was a pretty deep answer as well. There's a lot of detail in there. Does anybody else on the panel have something to add? Eric?
Obviously, I agree with all of that stuff. I've worked a lot with deepfakes, so I'm kind of somewhat on the other side there. I think one of the features to be afraid of right now is a lot of trust is being put into these models. A lot of work is being done to make them behave themselves. But the fundamental truth is ChatGPT, in fact, all the GPTs, are trained on the internet. The internet is made of all sorts of horrible shit. The internet is made of us, but it's a horrible, horrible mirror of what we are. So it contains all sorts of darkness and all sorts of badness that can appear. And I think, obviously the racial bias is phenomenal, particularly in image-based stuff. The vast majority of photos on the internet are of white bros in California, and all the image recognition systems are based on data sets that they've already got of white bros in California. And it's not representative of the world, nor is it representative of perhaps the ideals that we would like to hope that we have in ourselves. It's scraping 4chan, for fuck's sake, right? It's not scraping the great works of our moral thinkers. So I think there's a danger in the fact that it's reflecting back nonsense, not just the hallucinations, but biased hallucinations. I think it's one of the key problems. And the other one, I think, is the current threat is going to be hugely disruptive. I think don't underestimate how disruptive this technology is going to be very, very quickly. Obviously, as an artist, I've seen that wave hit quite dramatically in the last few months. It's coming for everyone to some degree. And I think the UK has 82% employment in service industry. Every single one of those jobs is under threat from someone plugging in ChatGPT to it. So I think the immediate threat is going to be that. It's going to be disruptive threat for us right here. And there's no way around that because, money's got a money, right? And as long as there's a profit in it, someone's going to do it.
Yeah, I think there's, talking about bias, I think there's something that's kind of obvious when you think of it, people don't mention it, is that these, obviously there are large ones being developed in China, and well, it's different, but essentially the ones being used in the West are, it's pretty much at this stage, they're English language, large language models. And in fact, I would say American language models. So there's kind of a very deep insidious bias, which we already have in current digital platforms anyway, but I think it's going to be accentuated with these models. So I'm very interested in, there's a big project called Bloom, which is a large language model, which is being specifically trained by thousands of people around the world, supporting about 100 languages. And I think so share an open source one as well. So I think things like that are going to be really important for the future.
I suppose really an extension of what's been said, but I think there's a kind of radicalization. So if you look at how most people use social media, most people get opinions and news from social media, not everyone, but most people. Social media is incentivized to get you to look at the next thing. An algorithm is probably behind that. The algorithm will promote something that is shocking to you, or more likely to promote something that is shocking. People will get more radicalized. So I think that's been happening. That's been happening for years. And coming to your question of what's happening now, you can see that. You can see how kids interact with phones. So you can see, this is not the same as it was 10, 20 years ago. So that's something that we're kind of, I suppose, looking at the moment that doesn't require particularly or any more AI than we have, or a better algorithm than we have. And yeah, that's what we're dealing with.
Great. I think I'm going to do one more question, then we're going to get a bit more audience involvement again. Don't worry, you don't have to do a dance or anything like that. Everyone's really nervous now. They're going to have to do a dance. But we're talking a lot about new technologies here. And I suppose it brings into question, and John mentioned it in his talk, alignment. And so what does everybody think about the AI alignment efforts so far? And I think we'll start with Colin on that one.
Yeah, so alignment's the big topic, I think. And, if you're going to go away from tonight and actually interested in this whole area, I think go and do some looking at the issue around alignment. It's kind of the central topic. And essentially that's about AI, developing AI which is aligned with human values. So the danger is that we'll have a misalignment. So we'd end up with AI which develops its own dangerous goals and then has the aim of defeating humanity. So that's when the big concern that the experts have the concern about. And so actually all the big AI labs, the big corporations, they all have substantial efforts, and they certainly talk enormously about huge efforts they're making in terms of alignment. I'm sure they're not doing as much as they say they're doing in the propaganda, but they are all taking it seriously at this stage. And there's some really fantastic work going on, really great work. But what I worry about is where that's going to go in the next few years with the commercial arms race that's just broken out in the last few months, and also the sort of a nationalistic AI arms race, in particular between US and China. So just to say one more thing about alignment, and then maybe I'll pass on the microphone and maybe come back, is that so alignment's a kind of central topic. So I'm going to illustrate this by this stage where alignment's at in practice is, for instance, ChatGPT is essentially it's GPT-3, but then it's been trained to be aligned with 3 values. So I'm trying to remember the numbers. It was like, there's a huge data set that was used to develop GPT-3, but 2 billion tokens, or sort of trillions of words. And then they used a data set which is like I can't remember, it's like 10 million tokens or something. So a much smaller data set which was used to align GPT-3 to create ChatGPT. And that work was done by these workers in Kenya that Lincoln referred to. And I'll just summarize the main process that went on there. Was essentially they, OpenAI gave the people in Kenya, they gave them prompts that people had put into GPT-3 on their open playground in previous months, and gave them, for each prompt, they gave them 4 to 9 possible responses to that prompt. And then these workers in Kenya were asked to rate the responses, from best to worst. And those responses were basically used to develop what's called a reward model, which was supposedly aligned GPT so that it didn't, say nasty things and so on, behaved well. And so I think I'll come back to what it was trained for in a moment, but this is illustrated when Microsoft released what was called Sydney, or what somebody found out was called Sydney. where they clearly hadn't done the same alignment training, because it was threatening people and doing all sorts of nasty things, which some of you might have seen on the internet. If you went on Reddit, there's some quite incredible things. Anyway, but to come back to the point, point I want to make last before I pass on is that they were asked to align, to score these responses on 3 values, which were honesty, helpfulness, and harmlessness. Okay, so, and this is a central theme in all these training of AIs and things that, so they actually, you know, they're trained on certain values. And one of the key things is, and I'll shut up in a minute, is that, you know, who decides what these values are? I mean, it sounds great, doesn't it? And it's all three great values, but it could have been trained on other ones. And for instance, I've been using another big chatbot called Character AI, and I don't know for sure, but I think it, well, I have some evidence, but I think it's pretty clear it was trained on some different values, and one of them was curiosity. And actually, I found that particular one, which isn't so well known, because it's often, you know, better for depending on what you want to do. So this issue of alignment and what the values are, who chooses those values, is really a central topic.
Yeah, I obviously agree with all that. I think it's worth pausing for a minute just to think about what these models generally are. So they're frequently deep learning models, which is neural network models that learn from what you show them. So what you show them is incredibly important. A neural network model only really reflects back the statistical distribution of the data you give it. So this has 2 ramifications. The first one is you want to be very careful about what you feed it, because if you feed it stuff that's biased, you get bias out, as has been demonstrated. So these attempts to align it are generally about tweaking the data set so it's less racist. Let's start there, you know. The second problem with that is that the models that it produces after it's done all this learning are fundamentally inscrutable. No one can go in there and fix it. You can't go into a neural network model and say, oh, that's the bit where you're a little bit racist, we'll just take that bit out, you'll be fine. No, you can't. You have to retrain it with a different set of data repeatedly over and over again. And to touch on the carbon footprint question earlier, I think the estimate was $12 billion worth of compute went into training GPT-3. $12 million worth of energy just went in to make that one model. Imagine you want to change it. Imagine if someone comes and says, your model's a bit racist. Can you make it a bit better? I'm going to spend another 12 million retraining it. No, I'm not going to do that. So the fact that the easiest thing to do is just scrape the internet and feed it in, and then you've got a system that you can't then fix without retraining, is fundamentally going to align your model with a set of unknown, unknown feelings and ideals, because all you've done is scrape the internet and spat it in. So I think this issue of alignment is going to come up again and again. I see that someone analyzed ChatGPT and found that it was left-leaning, and a researcher went off and generated right GPT, where he inverted the latent representations for a certain set of questions, and lo and behold, you've got a right-wing version of the model. So I think that my prediction for the immediate threat is going to be not people talking about ChatGPT. There's going to be 100,000 of these bastards out there, each of them with their own agenda that, again, is going to be inscrutable and, you know, beyond our control. So I think I don't know who takes charge of that, but at the moment it's Elon Musk and Google, the people who've got the data and the compute. But that's cheaper and cheaper. You know, I got a GPT model running on my GPU only today, so it's going to be in the hands of consumers very soon. Yeah.
I know we've got a question from the audience, but we'll wrap up the panel's views on this one, and then we'll take your question.
Yeah, I think I'd extend what Eric said. The point made over there was about news agencies, and if you sort of transpose the question onto that and say, well, how do we get news agencies with values? What sort of happened is, well, we've got lots of news agencies. There are left-wing, right-wing, whatever news agencies. So the value alignment will probably end up, being distributed across different models. There'll be different things you can go to get different responses. I think where that's simple, as long as you know, there's a little sign in the top left, you know, Fox News, okay, I know it's probably going to like Trump or whatever. What gets maybe more confusing or is more difficult to regulate is if that's hidden or obfuscated in ways. So I'm expecting to get Fox News, but I'm getting CBN or whatever. So I think it will, and your point, you know, compute will get a lot cheaper. It always has done, you know, so there will be these kind of, coming back to the question about, you know, where do you set the values? There are too many people with too many opinions to get some kind of consensus. There always has been, in a way. I'm sure there'll be some sort of broad churches, and I probably choose that term deliberately from a kind of religious kind of point, or groups of people who will, you know, assemble under one set of values. But yeah, I mean, anyone can set up anything, and there's a kind of potential weird freedom of speech of chatbots there. Kind of, okay, I'm allowed a right-wing one, or I'm allowed a left-wing one, or whatever. You know, as long as it stays within the rules of the government, you know, as exactly is now for speech of people.
All right. On this issue of alignment, I think there should be like third-party involvement in alignments, because it's looking like tech companies are setting these values themselves. So it's like being the judge and doing your own case. So I think open it up to people to, you know, take a look at what's behind the black box and see what's going on there.
We had a question from the audience as well.
It's kind of been answered, I think, but the comment was like, what if 10,000 of these bastards come along and retrain it with their own point of view? That seems closer to democracy than to try and figure out who is the one person that can be at the top of the hierarchy. I guess to turn this comment into something that sounds like a question, what does the panel think?
Eric, do you wanna start?
Yes.
I think you raised that point.
Yeah, to answer that, I'm going to turn tables on Eric completely and say, although I do sympathise with him, I think actually this is very idealistic. I don't think it's going to happen, but I think the solution will be is that it gets totally democratized, and we can all have our own personalized AI assistants. Yeah, if we could go all that way, at the end of the day, we're all sitting here. We've all got our own individual values, right? We're not beating each other up. We're not shooting each other. You know, we can't survive as a civil society without, you know, we have to have laws and we have to have police, unfortunately, and to deal with the bad actors. But generally, you know, I'm optimistic. People are generally good. Most people are good. We have the psychopaths and sociopaths and the nutters who cause trouble, which is why we have laws. But, you know, I think the solution could be literally you can have, you know, everybody can have their own AI. And I was talking with this, I think last year with one of my colleagues and thought, you know, it was great. And I thought it's going to be way off. But it's already happening. I mean, you were just saying you're running your own chatbot. I mean, I read last week that somebody's been running there's a large, well, it's not so large, but it is a large language model called Alpaca, which was actually a trained model called Meta released a large language called Llama in kind of a small and medium-sized versions. And then it was trained by 5 students at Stanford, to be like ChatGPT was, and you can actually run that on somebody had actually run it on a Raspberry Pi. Actually, the reason it's happening is because somebody leaked the Meta model, so it's already here. And I think, you know, the governments and the large corporations would want you to believe that this stuff is safe in their hands. You need lots of computing power to train them, and only they can do it. But don't believe it. You know, I think it's possible. We could all be running, you know, chatbots or AIs on our watches in a few years' time.
We certainly will be. I think they're going to be everywhere. I think the beautiful utopian idea that we're going to just talk to our own personal chatbot and everything will be fine is a bit naive, I'm afraid, because it's going to be Google, it's going to be Microsoft, right? It's going to be the channels that have the greatest reach. I think the one that I found the most disturbing recently is that apparently TikTok have introduced a chat agent, as a default buddy for all TikTok users. So the kids who, I want to chat about my day, what happened in school, my friends are online, there's someone there to talk to you. Now, that large language model is probably created by some shady Chinese company that we know nothing about, but it's in the hands of hundreds of millions of kids right now. So I think, yes, there will be lots of them, but some of them are going to have a lot more access to people than others, and the ones that have access to our kids are perhaps the ones you should worry about first.
I'll extend that to gaming. So I presume there'll be a lot of non-player characters that will be driven by chatbots that won't be individually trained by your family. So again, I'd sort of say that. I don't know if anyone on a sort of more sort of company note saw the kind of Microsoft Copilot kind of demo thing where this AI is going to do your spreadsheets. And sort of as you were talking about it, I wonder then whether if you had a small company, part of setting up your Microsoft, whatever it's going to be, 365 AI kind of thing, is you sort of try and imbue it with the culture of your company and sort of send it photos of your staff party and, sort of, here's, we'll download our Slack conversations into it to sort of, to train it. So, and then it'll write emails in the style of our company or whatever.
Except your company will have generated all of that by AI in the first place.
Well, yeah, so I don't know where you start then, but you can kind of see it, can't you, as part of an onboarding process for a small or large company. It's like, okay, our emails will be written in this style. So yeah,
sorry to butt in. Or it could be that your new employee comes in and you say, we want to check that you align with the values of this company. Please let us have access to all of your data so we can retrain our model to, it cuts both ways. I think. It does. Sorry.
That's all right. That's a good question. Talking about if everybody has their own kind of AI kind of thing, who is everybody? The global south, the global north? That's the question. Definitely not people in Africa. We're not going to have our own AIs. We don't have the resources. We can't afford it. So in a world whereby who has access to these chatbots, as a personal chatbot, is going to determine who gets what, when, and how. And in the long run, it's going to create a very unequal society.
Do you think it'll be beneficial, though, to people to have them? To anyone with them? So if it creates an unequal society, it would have to create advantage to having them. And I'm not sure it would.
Right. I think Oscar's at the mic. Have you got a question?
Hello, yes, I have a question from the remote audience. Two questions, in fact.
Okay.
And the first one I'm paraphrasing is how the panel strikes the balance between, on one side, the hype and hysteria versus the sarcastic cynicism around these AI tools, and how should non-technical, the population at large, strike that balance. On one end, you have claims that these are, well, we just saw a slide with a Terminator on it. On one end, we have that. And on the other, no, they're just regurgitating the internet and putting together badly and putting and creating bad Nick Cave songs. And we don't have to worry about it. How do you approach it? And what advice do you have for non-technical audiences? That was the first question. Sorry, it was very long.
But should we take them one at a time and then?
Sure.
Yeah. So Adebisi.
Oh, me. Could you summarize the question again? It was quite long.
So I think, and Oscar will tell me if I'm wrong, but I think the question here, so this is looking at the media reporting of AI, and there's often quite a lot of hype, there's often quite a lot of inaccuracy. And what would be your advice to kind of the ordinary person out there to understand the actual developments past all this hype and distortion by the media? Was that right, Oscar?
All right, got it. Thanks. Okay. I'm not a technical person. My background is in science policy and technology policy. So a good place to start would be from tracing the history of AI. AI is not a new technology. it's been around since the 50s. So that would be a good place to start. A good place is to like look at the history of the involvement of AI. AI has gone through what we call AI winters. AI winters were the periods whereby there was like low attention being given to AI, and all of a sudden you have the like AI summers where there's lots of money and investment going into AI, and the news outlets just go crazy about AI. So it's not a new technology. A good place is to read about the history of AI and how it's being used and developed in society, and some good books to read about AI and its deployment and the history of AI and these tools is books on race and technology by Ruha Benjamin, and a book called Dark Matter. Dark Matters by Simone Brown, and also Automating Inequality. These are good books to look about that will teach you or educate you on the history of AI and what it is, and what it is not. Yeah.
I think I'd separate slightly ChatGPT and AI. So ChatGPT at the moment is what's captured everyone's imagination and the conversation here. And it's sort of like poster child shop window. And probably understanding, you know, sort of, you could divide that question into two things. It's like, what's something like ChatGPT going to do for me? And maybe that goes down the sort of chatbot route of the previous question. But maybe what's the impact of AI on society? Again, is sort of a slightly different question, a much more longer term question to ask. And again, you know, sort of I'd look at the history, I'd look at books that are available with that. I don't think that's as fast moving a thing as sort of ChatGPT. So I think, you know, some of the organizations I posted up there are people trying to provide information, provide ways of understanding this. So I would try and point those in those directions, really.
Yeah, two different aspects. I would don't just read a chatbot's response, because they do bullshit. You can use them to learn, but check out what it's saying. They're particularly biased when you ask them about themselves, you may have noticed. Second piece of advice, a bit contrarian perhaps. You know, I've had some good suggestions here, so a different one. I would go to individual writers. I mean, they might be a bit more in depth, a bit more for the general public, but you know, I think people are pretty good at figuring things out. So I would suggest look at. There's lots of good writers on Substack. A lot of the you know, people who really know this stuff with very different views about it on Substack. You know, so obviously you can. Other brands are available like Medium and so on, but Substack is particularly prevalent with people who know about this stuff.
Yeah, on that note, Gary Marcus on Substack. Gary Marcus is a contemporary of mine when I did my PhD in neural networks in the 90s. So this stuff's been around for a long time. I think Colin's point about being aware that the machines lie is very important, because of my earlier point about trusting everything that is said in a natural language kind of way. We inherently believe it because it's talking to us in a human-like way. It's still spouting bullshit a lot of the time. And rather flippantly, I don't know, learn how to nap some stone axes, retrain as a plumber. You know, maybe that's the answer.
Brilliant. Have you given an answer, John? I've lost track now. I know incredibly we've just been talking for a long time, and we're coming close to time on this. Oscar, there was one other question from the remote audience.
Yeah, sure, if you allow it. The second question, and again, I'm paraphrasing, is with everything that can be now generated, deep-faked, and automatically generated at scale, what is the panel's advice to see through it? And how do we now go about determining authenticity and truthfulness when the deluge of deepfakes and auto-generated content with a mission will be put in front of us?
So if I can ask the panel to give a brief response to this one so that we can get some questions from the audience. I think Eric, as our lover of deepfakes, you're the best person to start here.
In terms of deepfakes, my line is, I have a lot of faith that culture adapts. And just because you're spooked by a deep fake means that culture will adapt and people will spot them very quickly. And people will learn to mistrust things that they previously trusted. Now that has an eroding effect on society as a whole, but I think culture itself adapts to misinformation quite well. We've been lied to all our lives. I think the quest for truth is, innate in us as humans. We want to know what's real and what isn't. I think people will always look for that. And my personal answer is, if you can see the whites of their eyes across a pub table while you're having a drink, well, then you probably believe it. Everything else is, up for manipulation, unfortunately. So don't trust anything, I guess.
Does anybody else on the panel have a view on that, or should we take some questions?
Just a quick one. I think regulation that states that these AI-created media should be watermarked could help people who can't identify these things to no, this is a AI-generated thing with those watermarks. That would help, I think.
Just to extend that, and I don't know this, but isn't this what blockchain could be used for? Does anyone know blockchain?
I'm not going to answer that.
That's sort of 2022, isn't it?
Great. Have we got any questions from the room? So we've got one up at the front here. Oscar roving with the mic and the beer.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm probably a generation older than many people in this room, so please humour an old man. I'll start off with a kind of trivial point and then go on to something a bit more serious. Certainly for me, I've been in AI and machine learning since 1994, so I'm that old, but that doesn't particularly colour this comment. My generation, especially to me, cannot often take these chatbots and things terribly seriously. To me, they're an electronic form of a swearing parrot. They cause huge amusement in the early things, and when you get used to them, you get bored with them fairly quickly. Most of the chatbots I deal with have got no sense of anticipation whatsoever. They just kind of regurgitate. I speak bitterly because in the last few days I've been fighting with both the Virgin Media and the EDF chatbots. And one of the games on my generation is, what is the fastest way to crash a chatbot? Right, so that's what we do, because the faster you crash them, the quicker you can get through to, talking to a human. So my final trivial observation on this is, if I ever install, was it ChatGPI, whatever it's called, or I don't know what it is, my first question to it will be, is something like, why is Jeremy Hunt such a twat? So that's the kind of level that, I have 3 degrees.
We can be friends.
Yeah, that's it, yeah. So, but my serious point, come back to, so I didn't catch your name, because this is the serious part of my thing. You were saying there were issues with facial recognition and colour and kind of whatever. To me, that's not artificial intelligence, that is bad programming, right? So either the programmers who developed that are cretins, or there's an issue with the technology for, the colour spectrum of things that it does. So for me, again, for my generation, if a person of colour was ever hauled up in front of a court accused of some kind of criminal offence based on this, any defence barrister could stand up and ask an expert, is this software flawed in any way? And any expert would say, oh yes, it doesn't work terribly well with people of colour. So either the judge would throw that out, or a jury would certainly. I mean, I would. That's just my generation. I'm not saying everybody in this room would. But for me, if I was in court and a barrister stood up and said, this software is flawed, I would throw it out as a member of the jury, or certainly the judiciary should throw it out, because it's clearly bollocks, if you'll pardon my French. Sorry, that's a rantings of an old man. I'll pass over to this, but that's, so, I probably said enough. I did have some serious other things about evolution, but I'll leave it at that.
Right, can I comment on that? These, like I said, I'm more a technical person. However, we are aware that there is evidence to show are powered by AI in some form. To get to your point of issue where a judge would throw that case out because you would ask, but the history, the evidence shows that we don't have that history of people of color going to court proceedings and being given that opportunity. We're not judged in that way. This is a conversation around social justice, and things do not work that way for people of color. I know that this is not the place to have that conversation, but it's what it is. And there's evidence to point to that. Yeah.
So the point was, any barrister with any skill would immediately
Pardon me, I'm going to have to ask you to wait for the microphone for the remote attendees.
Sorry, just come back on that. But any defence barrister with any kind of common sense would raise that immediately. Sorry, this is me. Yeah, that's my view. Certainly as a juror, because it now seems to be so well known that there are flaws in this system, it cannot be hidden from the general public. Sorry.
I'm very conscious of time, that we're going to get kicked out in a minute or two. I can see that Brian had a question, Andrew had a question. Brian, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, this is, well, it's more targeted to Eric than anyone else. I'd like to make a ChatGPT musical analogy with the music technology with which, when it came out, worried a lot of people. Do you think ChatGPT has more in common with the sampler or auto-tune? And how worried should we be?
Interesting question. I think it has the power to disrupt the sampler, more so than auto-tune, but I think its effect on society is going to be more like auto-tune. And that our expectation of interaction with other people will be smoothed out by AI. Pretty soon, all the emails you receive at work are going to be AI filtered. And most of the responses you give will be tailored by AI. So the visible communication of human beings will be smoothed out like auto-tune. The effect that has on our society will be as disruptive as a sampler.
Well, hands up, who can name another one from the last 5 years?
That's because we're old.
That's a good point. And anybody else want to share a view on that one? I think this is probably our last question. And anybody else want to share a view on Brian's question on the panel?
I hope it's as much as a sampler. Is all I can say.
Great. We got one more. I think probably last one in the room. Lincoln's got another question at the back.
So I just wanted to come back to a couple of points. One on like democratizing AI, thinking about it in terms of like, well, we have lots of news agencies, so you know everyone kind of has free speech. Getting onto the point about racial bias, things like that. I think there's like something that is like often overlooked with a lot of these discussions about technology and about institutions, is that you can't separate out people from technology because technology is made by people. You can't separate out people from institutions because people make institutions. And so a lot of the time when we think about, okay, well, let's democratize this, let everyone have their own say, we forget that like if we live in an unequal society, technology that is built by people that live in an unequal society reinforce those inequalities. Freedom of speech is great, but some people's voices are louder. And that means louder voices can reinforce inequalities that favor them, right? The same with institutions. Institutions can reinforce inequalities that favor them. It's all well and good to think, okay, well, maybe we can just educate people about something like racial bias in algorithms. But we know from like the history of like courts and law enforcement that we know things like eyewitness testimony is incredibly bad. And people have gone up and try to give expert testimony at court cases to say eyewitness testimony is bad and you can't rely on like people identifying other people. But yet it still is the case that if you're a person of color and you go up in a court case, that you are more likely to be identified as a perpetrator of a crime, even if it's not you. And you know, we know that there's like people on death row in the US that have been misidentified. But we know all of these things are bad, but there is, you know, institutions reinforce power structures that favor them. Corporations reinforce power structures that favor them. People with power develop technology that reinforces power structures that favor them. So I think it's like really important that we don't lose sight of the fact that people, technology, and institutions will reinforce power structures as long as there is an imbalance in the power that people have, because you can't separate out people from technology and institutions. So that's my little rant, sorry.
Thank you.
Does anybody want to respond on that? We've got about 1 minute, so I'm not sure how much we can say, but does anybody have anything they want to respond back? John?
How about getting AI to retrain people?
I think it's a very, very important point, and the distribution of power in the world is hugely uneven, and the distribution of wealth is hugely uneven, and the blindness of culture is huge. So Western institutions training their data on English language texts is not going to represent 90% of the world. There is no incentive, there's no capital incentive to change that behavior aside from change it when you get caught out. And I think this gentleman's point about being in front of a judge is very true. Unfortunately, 90% of the population never get in front of a judge. The algorithmic decisions are being made for their lives by these machines that are inherently biased, and no one even knows the bias is there. So it requires active work to make the things as we would like them to be. And we're at the stage where it's not. At the moment, it's just shovel the data in. You know, we've got the big data, shovel it in, we get out what the Western world on the internet looks like. And it's not a pretty place, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think the thing we need to remember is that it's not so much about algorithms now. So referring to the chatbots, you know, the chats have been around for a long time. They are more rule-based ones, as you know better than I do. The point is about these new models is that they're not really algorithms. They're basically models trained on large data sets. And what concerns me is that there's not enough talk about those data sets and the biases in those data sets. People are saying, well, we've got a model, we'll align it. Just start with the material that it's made from, the raw materials. That's really the thing that's not being talked about enough. I referred to it earlier to, we've got an American language bias in these models, and but it's anyway, I've said my piece.
Yeah, I think Adebisi's got a last word as well.
So in the conversation,
Always this mic. Only you as well.
Yeah. So in the conversation around AI and its deployment, its design and development in society, it's important that we engage civil society, stakeholders, the tech companies, communities that will be impacted by the use of AI, and communities that have been impacted by use of AI in these conversations. Without this group of people at the table, we have a very, very gloomy future.
Fantastic. I don't know why this mic doesn't work for you, because it's never failed on me yet. So there you go. AI in action. I think that's a brilliant place to end it, because we're obviously well over time. I'd love everybody in the room to give a massive hand for our fantastic panel.